Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really interesting.
Yeah.
How computers are getting seriously good at seeing things. Not just recognizing a cat in a photo, but like understanding everything in the picture.
Down to the pixel level.
Exactly. Labeling every single pixel. We're looking at a research paper called Multiscale Context Aggregation by Dilated Convolutions. Sounds complex, but the idea is pretty cool.
It is. It offers a really clever new way for computers to get that deep pixel level view of an image. So our mission today, yours and ours, is to break down how they do it and why it's actually a big deal.
Yeah, because this isn't just lab stuff, right? This kind of super detailed image understanding is, well, it's crucial for tech that's becoming really common.
Absolutely. Think about self-driving cars needing to know exactly what's road, what's a person, what's a sign.
Or medical imaging. Yeah, finding tiny
Yeah.
anomalies. Pinpoint accuracy matters.
Big time.
So, have you ever, stopped and wondered how a machine looks at just a grid of colored dots and suddenly knows what it's seeing, almost like we do,
Yeah.
and how they keep improving?
It's fascinating.
Well, this research digs into one specific, really ingenious technique that helps them do just that.
And it builds on things like convolutional networks, CNNs. They were already huge for, say, image classification, telling you if it's a cat or a dog in the picture.
Right, classifying the whole image.
But this semantic segmentation, it's different. It's way more granular. Instead of one label for the whole picture, it's a label for every single pixel.
Going from it's a cat to, okay, this pixel is cat fur, that one is the cat's eye, and this bunch over here,
Yeah.
that's the sofa it's sitting on.
Precisely. A much, much harder problem.
Okay, so let's really dig into that challenge. Semantic segmentation. It sounds like you need two things at once, like be super precise about each pixel,
Uh-huh.
but also understand the whole scene, the big picture, to get the pixel labels right.
You've absolutely nailed it. That's the core tension. You need that fine-grained, pixel-level accuracy, but you also need that broader understanding, the multi-scale contextual reasoning.
Contextual reasoning.
Yeah. Like the know a pixel is part of a car. The computer can't just see a gray dot. It needs to see that dot as part of a larger shape, maybe next to pixels that look like a wheel, and maybe understand it's all on something that looks like a road.
Right, the context helps identify the specific pixel. So before this paper and dilated convolutions came along, how are people trying to solve this? What were the main approaches?
Well, one common way was to take those networks that were good at classifying whole images, like VGG or ResNet,
Uh-huh.
and sort of adapt them, try to make them work for segmentation.
Okay. Makes sense. Reuse what works.
Yeah, but the authors here raise a good question. Are all the parts of those networks designed for that single image label really necessary? Or even helpful when your goal is predicting every single pixel?
Like maybe some parts were actually getting in the way, designed for a different job.
Exactly. Maybe adding complexity or even losing information that's useful for the pixel task.
Okay, so repurposing classification nets was one way, but maybe not ideal. What else?
Another popular technique involved shrinking the image representation down inside the network, pooling and striding,
Yeah.
to get that broad context.
Right.
But then you lose all the detail. So they try to recover it later using something called up convolutions or deconvolutions to get back to the original size.
Ah, okay. Shrink then grow.
Yeah, but again, the authors asked, was that initial shrinking, the downsampling, really essential? Did you have to lose all that fine detail just to understand the bigger picture? Maybe there's another way.
Interesting point. Throwing away info you need later.
Yeah.
Was there a third main approach?
There was also the idea of feeding the network multiple versions of the same image, but at different sizes, different scales.
Like feeding it a zoomed-in version and a zoomed-out version.
Kind of, yeah. Analyzing these different scales separately and then trying to combine the results.
Yeah.
But the team here wondered, is that the most efficient way? Is there maybe some redundancy in processing all those different versions independently?
Okay, so it sounds like people were trying different things, but there were these lingering questions about whether those methods were fundamentally the best way for dense pixel-level tasks.
Exactly. Which leads us perfectly into their solution.
Dilated convolutions. Let's get into it. What are they? What's the magic here?
Okay, so a standard convolution uses a small filter, like 3 by 3, that looks at immediate neighbors, right?
Right.
A dilated convolution introduces a dilation factor. Let's call it OL. This factor basically inserts gaps into the filter. So instead of looking at immediate neighbors, a 3 by 3 filter with a dilation factor of, say, 2 will look at pixels that are one step away, skipping the ones in between.
gaps. So the filter has holes in it, effectively.
You can think of it that way, yeah. It's like stretching the filter's reach without adding more weights or parameters.
How does that help? Stretching it out.
Well, this is the clever bit. Those gaps let the filter cover a much larger area of the input. Its receptive field grows. But crucially, without losing resolution and without increasing the number of parameters in the filter itself.
Ah, so you get to see more context, a wider area, without the computational cost of a massive filter.
Exactly. And the paper mentions this exponential expansion of the receptive field.
Yeah, what does that actually mean in practice?
It means if you stack these dilated convolutional layers and you systematically increase the dilation factor, maybe layer 1 has dilation 1, standard, layer 2 has dilation 2, layer 3 has dilation 4, layer 4 has 8, and so on.
Doubling it each time.
Yeah, or something similar. Then the effective area that each neuron sees in the original input grows exponentially. Figure 1 in the paper shows this really well. A 3x3 filter in one layer might effectively see a 3x3 area. The next layer with dilation 2 might see a 7x7 area. The next with dilation 4 sees a 15x15 area, all with the same lightweight 3x3 filter computation in each layer.
Wow, okay, that is clever. So the view just explodes outwards layer by layer.
Precisely. You get that multi-scale context aggregation built right in.
The paper also makes a point about distinguishing this from convolution with a dilated filter. What's that about?
It's a subtle point about terminology, maybe implementation. Convolution with a dilated filter might imply you literally create a bigger filter with zeros stuffed in the gaps.
Right.
But dilated convolution emphasizes that it's the operation itself that's modified. You use the same small set of weights, but you apply them at location spaced according to the dilation factor. It's about how you sample the input, not about making the filter physically larger, more efficient.
Got it. A different way of applying the same small filter.
Yeah.
And they mentioned this idea wasn't entirely brand new, something about algorithmetry.
Yeah, that translates to algorithm with holes. It shows the core idea of using these spaced out or dilated operations existed before, particularly in signal processing for wavelet decomposition, analyzing signals at different scales.
For a bit of history there.
Right. And they also note that some previous work, like from Long and colleagues, they analyzed dilated filters but didn't really use them in their main network for this purpose.
And Chen et al. Used them, but more for just simplifying things.
Kind of, yeah. This work, though, makes dilated convolutions the central piece, the core mechanism, for building a new module specifically designed to aggregate context at multiple scales.
Okay, so that brings us to their main contribution. The context module. What's its job?
Its main job is exactly that. Aggregate multi-scale contextual information, take feature maps coming from earlier in the network, and enrich them with information from increasingly larger surrounding areas.
And critically, it does this without shrinking the feature maps, right? No loss of resolution.
Exactly. It takes feature maps in, does its context aggregation using those dilated convolutions, and outputs feature maps at the very same spatial size. So you keep all that pixel level detail. You can slot this module in almost anywhere.
Yeah, what does it look like inside? The paper calls it a rectangular prism.
Yeah. That's a good visual. Unlike networks that shrink then grow, like a pyramid or hourglass, this is just a stack of convolutional layers. No pooling, no subsampling inside this module, just convolutions.
Okay, and the basic version they describe has, what, 7 layers? Mostly 3x3 convolutions?
That's right, 7 layers. The dilation factors go 1, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and then 1 again at the end.
Why that sequence? 1, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 1.
Well, the 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 part gives you that exponential growth and receptive field we talked about, wider and wider context. The initial dilation 1 probably processes local details first. The final dilation 1 might help integrate all the context gathered at different scales. Then there's a simple activation function setting negative values to 0 and a final 1x1 convolution.
What's the 1x1 convolution for at the end?
That's pretty standard. It's often used to mix information across all the different feature channels and potentially reduce the number of channels if needed. It sort of combines everything the module has learned.
And the receptive field growth is huge, right? From 3x3 up to something like 67x67.
Yeah, it expands really quickly just by stacking those layers with increasing dilation. Each layer builds on the receptive field of the one before it.
And despite seeing such a wide area, the number of parameters, the learnable bits, stays relatively small, around 64 times c squared, where c is the number of channels.
It's very efficient in terms of parameters. because you're reusing that same small 3 by 3 filter structure, just applying it differently. Much cheaper than trying to use, say, a massive 67 by 67 filter directly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
But they ran into a problem when training this module, didn't they? Something about initialization.
they did. This is actually really interesting. They found that just initializing the filter weights with random numbers, which is standard practice, well, it didn't work very well for the specific context module.
Huh, why not?
They don't definitively say why, but they found a clever solution: identity initialization.
Identity initialization, what's that?
Basically, they set the initial weights of the filters, as shown in their equation 4, so that each layer just passes its input directly through to the output. Initially, the module does almost nothing.
Wait, hang on. You set it up so it doesn't change the input at first? How does that help it learn? That sounds really backwards.
It does sound counterintuitive. You'd think starting from nothing would make it hard to learn. But their theory, and the results backed it up, was that the training process backpropagation could still effectively figure out how to adjust those weights to capture useful context, starting from that identity mapping.
So it's like giving it a very clean, simple starting point and letting the training figure out the complex stuff.
Kind of. Maybe it prevents the network from getting stuck in a bad state early on. It ensures gradients can flow easily at the beginning. Whatever the reason, it worked much better than random initialization for them.
And they had a larger context network, too, with more feature maps and a slightly adjusted initialization for that.
Yeah, they experimented with a version that had more channels, more feature maps in the middle layers. The idea being it could potentially learn even richer contextual representations.
Makes sense.
And the generalized initialization in equation 5 just adapted the identity idea for those varying numbers of channels. They also added a tiny bit of noise to break symmetry, just to help different filters learn different things.
Okay, so that's the core context module. Very neat. But the whole system isn't just that module, right? There's also a front-end module.
Correct. The front end comes first. It takes the original color image as input and does the initial processing, extracting basic features. It generates the feature maps that then get fed into the context module.
And this was based on VGG16, which is a classic network.
Yes, based on the convolutional layers of VGG16, but they adapted it specifically for this dense prediction task.
How did they adapt it? What did they change from the standard VGG?
The most important change, following some earlier work but simplifying it, was removing the last 2 stages of pooling or striding.
Those are the layers that usually shrink the image size down in classification networks.
Exactly. Shrinking is good for getting one label for the whole image, but bad if you need precise location for every pixel. By removing those, they kept the feature maps at a higher spatial resolution.
But doesn't removing pooling reduce the receptive field, make it harder to see context?
Ah, but that's where dilation comes in again. To compensate for removing the pooling, they applied dilation to the convolutional layers after the removed pooling stages.
Ah, okay, so they use dilation in the front end too.
Yes, a dilation factor of 2 for layers that would have come after the first removed pooling layer, and a factor of 4 for layers after the second removed one. This helped maintain a large receptive field even without the pooling.
So the front end output is higher resolution, like 64 by 64.
Right, more detailed than a standard VGG output used for classification. They also made some other tweaks, like using reflection padding at the input and removing some internal padding to simplify things.
And they trained this front end on the Pascal VOC 2012 dataset, plus some extra data. How did just this simplified front end do on its own? Table 2 compares it.
It did surprisingly well. Their front end, even without the context module yet, significantly outperformed baseline methods like FCN8s and the original DeepLab.
Really? By how much?
By over 5 percentage points in mean IOU on the test set, which is a pretty big jump.
Wow. And it even beat DeepLab with CRF post-processing.
Yeah, according to the numbers they reported, their front end alone, no CRF, was better than DeepLab plus CRF. It suggests their simplification and the use of dilation in the front end were already very effective for this task.
Okay, so the front end was already strong. Now, the big question. What happens when you add the context module? Table 3 shows these experiments.
That's where things get really good. Adding the context module, whether the basic one or the larger one, consistently boosted the accuracy further.
On top of the already improved front end?
Yes. And this boost happened whether they were just using the modules alone or combining them with other post-processing techniques like a dense CRF or the more advanced CRF RNN.
So the context module provided an additional benefit across the board. It plays well with others.
It seems so. It showed a nice synergy improving results, both on its own and when combined with structured prediction methods. Figure 3 visualizes some of these improvements too.
Okay, so strong results on the validation set. What about the final test set evaluation? Table 4.
The test set results confirmed the trend. The large context module added to the front end gave a significant accuracy boost.
How significant?
Well, the front end plus the large context module, even without any CRF, actually outperformed a strong baseline. Deep Lab CRF trained on extra COSIO data with a large field of view.
Just the network output beating a system with post-processing.
According to their results, yes. Then, when they combined their context module with the dense CRF, the performance was on par with the state-of-the-art CRF-RNN method at the time.
And the best result overall.
The best accuracy came from combining their large context module with the CRF-RNN. It really shows the power of their context aggregation approach.
Those are impressive numbers for the time. It really validates the whole dilated convolution and context module idea. But they didn't just test on Pascal VOC, did they? They went further. Appendix A talks about urban scenes.
That's right. They wanted to show this wasn't just good for general object segmentation, but also for really challenging, complex, real-world scenes, like the kind needed for autonomous driving.
So they tested on datasets like CAMVID, KDTI, and cityscapes.
Exactly. These are standard benchmarks for urban scene understanding. They applied their architecture front-end plus context module, calling the combined system Dilation 7, Dilation 8, or Dilation 10, depending on the dataset configuration.
And how to do there.
It set new state-of-the-art results on all 3 datasets at the time of publication.
Wow. Beating the previous best methods.
Yes. And importantly, for these urban scene results reported in the main tables, tables 5, 6, 7, 8, they achieved this without using any CRF post-processing.
So the raw network output was already state-of-the-art.
On those benchmarks, yes. Figure 5 shows some visual examples. They also detailed their training process for each dataset, adapting things like crop sizes and learning rates. On cityscapes, they showed how accuracy improved step by step. Front end only, then adding the context module, then training everything jointly. It really highlighted the impact of the context module.
It sounds like a very robust and broadly applicable approach then. What about the future? Where do they see this going?
They hinted at some exciting possibilities. One was the potential, maybe with even more data, to build fully dense architectures. Networks that operate at the full image resolution from input to output.
No downsampling at all.
Potentially, and maybe even getting rid of the need for pre-training on image classification datasets like ImageNet. You could train directly for the dense prediction task end-to-end.
That would be a big shift towards simpler, more unified architectures designed specifically for segmentation or other dense tasks.
Exactly. Moving away from adapting classification networks towards purpose-built dense prediction networks.
But it wasn't perfect, right? They showed some failure cases in Figure 4.
Right, no model is perfect. Even their best configurations still made mistakes sometimes. Things like confusing a sofa for a chair or mixing up similar animals like cats and dogs.
So, still room for improvement.
Definitely. It shows that while their method was a significant advance, challenges remain, especially with very similar categories or unusual object poses. There's always more work to be done in computer vision.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive. What are the absolute key takeaways from this paper on dilated convolutions?
I think the main thing is that dilated convolutions offer a really powerful and efficient way to aggregate context over multiple scales without losing spatial resolution. That's crucial for dense prediction.
And their context module, built using this idea.
Yeah, their context module, combined with that simplified front end, proved to be really effective, pushing state-of-the-art results significantly on several challenging benchmarks.
What was the big aha moment for you reading this?
For me, it was probably the power of designing an architecture specifically for the dense task, moving away from just adapting classification networks.
Right? Questioning assumptions.
Yeah, and the fact that removing things like pooling layers actually helped. And that counterintuitive identity initialization works so well for the context module. It really shows the value of rethinking standard approaches.
And why should you, listening at home, care about this, even if you're not building robots?
Well, because this kind of research directly fuels the progress in technologies that rely on computers seeing safer self-driving cars, better medical diagnostics from scans, more capable robots, even improved photo editing tools. It's about making machines understand the visual world more like we do, which has all sorts of downstream benefits.
So one final thought to leave everyone with. Given how well this approach worked for semantic segmentation,
Mm.
what other computer vision problems might benefit from this kind of dedicated, multi-scale context aggregation using dilated convolutions?
That's a great question. Maybe things like depth estimation or optical flow or boundary detection, any task needing pixel level understanding with context.
And what about that idea of fully end-to-end training at full resolution? What kind of data would we need to really unlock that? Just
Yeah.
more or different kinds of data?
Excellent food for thought. If you want to dig deeper yourself, definitely look up the paper by Fisher Yu and Vladlin Colton. They were at Princeton and Intel labs. They also mentioned planning to release code and models, which would be fantastic for exploring this further.